r/Nosleep. Posted by u/Divol59. Inunakimura, the abandoned howling village of rural Japan. Part 1. Japan is an incredibly popular country. The land of the rising sun, so they say. In fact, the Japanese for Japan is Nihon, which directly translated to sun's origin. What an image! Its flag, so simple, depicts that very sun. If you've ever visited, you will have seen that golden red light yawn into waking, rising tall behind the spearing, edifying skyscrapers of Tokyo, or slowly and effortlessly trickling its honeyed warmth across the myriad hulking mountains, heavily forested, beautifully bare, or capped with frightfully bright and glistening snow, that can be spotted from near anywhere. That promising dawn calls the brave and bold deer into Nara Park, whilst reflecting a rippling twin in the serene ponds of masterfully constructed gardens. It discloses the secrets of night, bursting the temples and shrines into their striking, inherent wonders, immense and extravagant, or humble and half-hidden, both. It casts glinting diamonds on the surface of the ocean, whilst warming the soft and fine sand of seaside towns and fishing communities. Or offers an omnipresent warmth, should the soothing local onsen not catch your fancy. Perhaps you've seen a more rural pocket of the country, in which the coming day offers the sight of waking sunshine crawling listlessly across neatly maintained farms, the flowing rivers, placid rice fields, or, if the season is right, tickling the stark, stunning vividness into the brief and beautiful cherry blossoms. Everyone, whether visited or not, will have an image evoke in their mind when they think of Japan. Perhaps some will think of the stern, stolid faces and precise singing blades of the feudal samurai, others may dart to the more nimbler legends, ninjas, with their spinning shurikens and lethal poisons, blending in with society as if they are not trained dealers of death. Or, if you're more regal, maybe the famous emperors and empresses. Mayhaps the poised, elegant and terribly beautiful geishas? Hypnotically beautiful kanji strokes, and silken kimonos, each a piece of art within their own right. Some of you, more innocent, will think of the food. The sushi and sashimi, udon and miso, fried chicken and takoyaki, fried octopus, obento, teriyaki, rice. Of course, there's the anime culture, too, which draws in a crowd of its own. Even those who aren't ardent fanatics will have most likely had a Japanese anime entertain their youth at one point or another. It can't be argued that the name of the country alone sparks crackling branches of wonder and amazement, but Japan has a whole other side to it. As the aforementioned sun retires after a day of beauty, it retreats from sight, and though the neon signs of cities may offer a different world of beauty, flashes, noise and awe, that paint over the dark and winding alleys, izakaya-heavy streets and wide roads, as if they were a canvas made for them, the rest of the country is plunged to near darkness. In the Inaka, the countryside, mists rise highlighted by the weak lampposts or the brave lanterns, the fields plummet into vast ocean of darkness, and the entire world changes. For some a world of unquestionable peace. To others, a world of horror, demons and spirits, oni and monsters. Twisted, malevolent creatures that stalk the flatlands as silent as a shadow, some shaped like us, others deformed and hideous to behold. Some creatures, it is said, lay waiting aside the invisible rushing rivers with mischief and intentions of malcontent. Pale white skin, slick black hair and gaping mouths, ethereal beauty that will steal your soul, roaming, rattling skeletons that advance toward any lone traveler, pariahs that live in the wild, and will claim the lives of any who stumble by, extending limbs that ensnare and squeeze the breath from you. It's endless. Should you be unfortunate to be lost whilst hiking, and desperately navigating your way to reach the foot of the mountains as these spectral mists rise, perhaps that silhouette or peripherals caught lurching behind a thin, gnarled tree is just your imagination. Perhaps it is not. The stars will twinkle silently above, as you feel your breath hollowing, and as a gust of wind tickles at the sleeping leaves, causing them to rustle their annoyance, you may even hear a scuttle, a soft footstep, a whispered slither as something approaches, ever closer. I have been on many hiking trips with friends I have made here. Even in the cities, hiking is a popular hobby seeing as they don't need to travel far. It's easy to wake early on a Saturday, hop on a train to the nearest mountain, pass a shrine with the bows, claps and prayers, before you're ascending the unsteady terrain. Most of the mountains have tried and tested trails that lead you via path to the best viewing points, often littered with the tired tourists who are at their wits' end at this point, flashing selfies and shots of scenery, because that is the reason they braved it in the first place. There is a mountain in Kyoto that goes as far as having an endless army of bright orange torii gates marching the entire length of the mountain, and with its popularity, boasts a reserve of traditional lanterns that dog the trail with a warming glow, chasing the falling night away. The hiking is exhilarating, but sooner or later, when you've hiked through all the mountains in your locale, and even those of neighboring towns, the ones that you can just about make out through the distant, dancing mists or haunting, advancing fogs, well, the exhilaration fades. You've seen that view, and though it's breathtaking, it's been done. Completed. You want more, to experience more. Luckily, the one colleague turned friend, Kazunori Nishimoto, I hiked with most shared my ennui. He spoke very little English, and I spoke very little Japanese. I believe this was a reason we enjoyed each other's company so much. There was no small talk. No conversation for the sake of conversation. We knew the drill, we knew what to pack. We would meet with our coffees and good morning, Ohayo gozaimasu, from me, good morning, from him. I never understood why we used each other's language for that, but it was the expected. Then, we get to boarding the train, or bus with our blinking, tired eyes tickling over the respective different languages in our own books. Then, the train would lull to a stop, alighting a stream of passengers, and we would get out to begin the hike. During the ascent, we'd offer little comments of beauty, or interest, sometimes Japanese, others English, with no rule, rhyme or reason. If not comments, we loosed innocent laughter as we stumbled up and slipped down mulchy, sodden, dry, flat, whatever terrain, but mostly it was quiet, a way to have company, but enjoy solitude in one harmonious fashion. Then we would reach the peak, not always the official guide's peak, either, in which we would sit, proud and tired, looking over the evening sprawl of colorful houses and their logged, flicking roofs, or the night's weak glowing lampposts and orange flickering lanterns in the low distance, like fallen, sleeping stars. He'd unsheath his flask, and we'd both share his strong, but welcome whiskey, and let it burn warmth into our bodies to fight against the unchallenged breeze, gently mussing our hair, or noticeably tugging at our coats. To sit there, on top of the town, watching as the land of the setting sun would once more be reclaimed by night, it was heaven, truly the epitome of contentedness. We'd stumble through little conversation, then carefully make our way back down to rinse and repeat the week until we hiked again. But that need for something more I mention, it took conquest over us. It mastered us. Conquered us. And so, when I was sitting in the office, to have him come over with a battered old article, curling at the edges and stained with age and spills, and then heard the words, translate. We will visit. I was curious. The fading image on the article showed 4 stacks of heavy bricks in front of a heavily graffitied tunnel. Then, I got to translating, a slow task for me, considering I was there purely to teach English, like most foreigners I've met here do. Inunakimura. Dog howling village, literally. The name itself already had me interested. Then I saw there was a gate, which leads into the town, stating the constitution and laws of Japan do not apply here. Immediate excitement. Perhaps akin to a moth in flame, but still, I was compelled all the same. We lived in the Fukuoka prefecture of Japan, which is situated in the northwest of the bottommost, of the main 3, islands, Kyushu. This village, Inunakimura, sat in a remote and sequestered area of that very prefecture, blooming with heavy forests so thick that the town itself could not be seen. This is not uncommon. I've stumbled upon immense and awe-inspiring structures that, from the outside, are completely concealed by a canopy of mottled dark green, yellow, orange, red and light green. When I did more research, to find that it was only accessible via a single tunnel, the one in the picture, which caved in on the men constructing it, my kindling morbid intrigue roared to a blaze. I read that some say the howling of dogs that can be heard is not from the dogs at all, but from the calls of the spirits trapped in the tunnel, angry and vengeful at their fate. There are those who believe that the cries are those of the villagers who were killed. Some reports say a killer swept through the village in a mad rage, frothing at the mouth, and slaughtering anyone unfortunate enough to be outside and crossing his path, before breaking his way into houses, slipping through open doors, or barging in with brute force, and brutally stealing the life of those within wielding a crude, sharpened hatchet. In the midst of the town, you can hear their screams, it says, howling in the gusts, or the imprint of helpless, hapless defeated cries of the vulnerable unable to avoid their impending fate. Other reports say it was a plague that stole in and prowled, conjured from shadows and evil energies, and surging relentlessly through the meandering pathways to steal the village of its people. That it swept through in a terrible, sudden wave, swift and wraith-like, siphoning the health and life from all within, young to old, until their bodies dropped, rotted and festered, allowing the sickly sweet scent of mortifying flesh to be plucked up by the wind, and borne in the surrounding bosky thickets in which canine packs roamed, hungry and vicious. And still, this place, so unsuspecting, so terrible and famous amongst Japanese citizens, had another claim for its ghastly infamy. That the dam built nearby backed up the water, so the levels continued to rise until people slipped into the treacherous hazard, and gulped down the icy water before succumbing to its depths. There are reports of spirits seen roaming, still crying for the help they would never get. Calls of mercy from within the dilapidated houses. Bodiless groans of anguished sickness as life fizzled from them. That criminals on the run flee here, as behind those gates, they are free from justice. That murders have happened here, immolation, planned, sacrifices. Footsteps, demons, watch as those living explore the town that will become their tomb. Drowned villagers look up from the murky depths, through water-ravaged faces and blank white eyes, wishing to yank the living into a similar fate. And all this if you can even get past the tunnel, in which the perished builders will either lure you to a spot in which the tunnel will collapse once more, and have you join them. Or cry for you to return the way you came, and avoid torment. Perhaps I'm mad for wanting to trade truly halcyon views, for the murky, shadowed, secluded and evidently innumerably cursed scape of an abandoned village, but of all the demons and ghasts I've mentioned above, I've yet to see one. Maybe this will be my chance. We're heading there alone this weekend, and I can't wait to update you with what we find. Inunakimura, the abandoned howling village of rural Japan. Part 2. The sky was a blanket of gloom and grayness, so dark and angry it looked as if billows of acrid smoke roiled and raged amongst one another. There were very few sporadic patches of silver where the white morning sun burst through, but whether they were faint hints, promising a clear sky later, it was too early to tell. But my focus was before me, taking in the tunnel of Inunakimura. The night before, I didn't sleep too well due to the roaring wind. One thing I didn't expect when I moved here was the weather and its intensity. Of course, in the UK people comment on the weather, regardless of compliment or complaint. But over here, you could spend the day in scorching sunlight, sweating the last drip of moisture from within you, only to lay shuddering in bed, cocooned by duvet, heater on, as gale force winds buffeted the neighborhood causing an orchestral clangor as it took to rattling all fittings and fixtures, and howling through the streets like a rabid pack of spectral wolves. The summer storms were immense. I mean immense. Cataclysmic. Biblical. I still remember the first time I stood, awed, staring from my patio and watching that forked lightning flash, sudden and divine, over the mountainous horizons. Bruisingly humbled as for a fraction of a second the very shroud of night was stunned senseless by a blinding blink of brilliant illumination, highlighting the slashing rain that wept uncontrollably, hammering the town, only for it to plunge into darkness once more, followed by a furious, deafening crack of ground-shaking thunder that felt as if it could fell those mountains and raze the town to dust. Of course, the weather in spring is much calmer than that, but it was still subject to bitter bouts of rage, just like the night before. I thought of it as nature's mourning. The cherry blossoms were dying. I watched over the last 3 weeks as the trees that had been bare, abandoned and crooked all year round suddenly popped proud and pretty as a peacock's plumage, and, already, as I cycled past them, each petal plummeted and peppered to the ground after a too short life, the tears of transience. I woke when it was still dark, of course, as was the routine for our hiking trips, and got myself ready in a half-lucid state. I was exhausted, but I usually didn't wake up properly for at least an hour or two after I left my bed. I'm only human after all. A coffee was the antidote. The town, like myself, had not awoken by the time I left the house, showered and brushed. The stars were blocked by those same clouds I would witness the tunnel under, though, a swirling deep purple at this point. Darkness lulled the open rice fields and secluded vineyards, keeping them quiet and secret. The wind, much calmer now, crept and taunted as I made my way to the station where we always met. As I saw the line of the convenience store glowing and inviting like a middle-aged tavern, open 24 hours a day, thankfully, I stopped in to pick up the coffee I needed from equally tired and yawning staff, then continued on my way. I was surprised however, when I got to the station, to see Nishimoto-san standing hunched and alone at the entrance without backpack or supplies. We nodded in acknowledgement to one another, until I was close enough that we could speak at a normal volume, and offered the usual good morning in the other's language. He seemed to pick up on my confusion, perhaps painted on my sleepy face in the pale light emanating from within. "No train," he said quietly, shaking his head. "Today car." "Oh?" is all I could manage at that point. We'd never gone by car before, but I suppose it made sense. From what I'd read about Inunakimura, it was sequestered, far off the beaten path. Perhaps the train would leave us too far off. And to be honest, I'd found a lot of my experience here was just being pushed from place to place. It was usually best to just follow where I was pointed, seeing as my Japanese was too poor to understand any explanation. Okay. He led the way to his car, bade me to put my bag in the back where I saw his had been tucked into the seatbelt. I did the same, and then made my way around as he opened the front passenger door with a polite, croaked, "Please." Then, we were off. As we drove, I could feel the coffee licking life into me, thoughts and excitement starting to flame as the sky glimmered from that dark purple to the gray I mentioned. Even in the car, we were mostly silent, but that was always fine with us. I stared out, watching the scenery of Japan pass by me, which, even under the miserable sky, was beautiful. As always, the distance was guarded jealously by bulking mountains, but everything from there to the window, which my forehead was clumsily pressed against, was just beautiful. One moment, we were rumbling quietly through the outskirts of the town, in which the houses, clambering hither and thither, high and low, different sizes, varying layouts, ever-changing roofs, began to delicately trickle their rainbow of colors into the world, defying the sobering mood above. Their gardens, an array of everything from carefully pruned rich green bushes, zen and peaceful, to blooming bouquets which harbored all the soothing tones of spring in one place. Then, the scenery gave way to more vast farming fields of I don't even know what. Lined and neat, with no fence but trust to block them off from the outside world. We would be driving through level, plain land for a while, until suddenly there would be a restaurant propped up proud and elusive in the middle of it all. Structurally stunning for what it was, with hip and gable roofs tumbling down one another on 3 or 4 different levels, like a wooden waterfall. On the front, fanciful kanji stroked across in sharp black and red designs, which I couldn't read, and smaller signs dotted about written in hiragana or katakana, which I could read. Kinda. Then, out of nowhere, vast depths of trees would pour out to the side of us, rushing down a drooping landscape. I leaned up in my seat to get a better look, to see a wild descent into a thick, overgrown forest of which the canopy was so interwoven it seemed like a mossy, glistening emerald ocean. Either we had gradually driven onto higher ground, or the land stooped without warning. I shuddered to myself, as my thoughts plunged me into being thrust somewhere like there at night, lost, cold, and vulnerable to the whims of the wild woods. I snapped my mind back to itself, knowing that my actual trip was going to be eerie enough. I didn't need to prologue that with imagined worries. Luckily, the bosky depths arose and leveled out once more, and we drove through other towns. Above the roads, the tangled mass of electrical wires clung from post to post, shooting off down every street, and bundling around larger posts before veering off into the distant pylons. Here and there, I saw a few lights flourishing near and far within the houses, and checked my watch to see that it was 8:17. Normal people were starting to wake now, but the town was still very much empty of footfall. The overall drive took just over an hour. Thought it felt as if we'd journeyed through a multitude of biomes in that time, as if every 5 minutes was a portal into a new world. After a while, I saw a mountain just ahead, clawing upward, as if wanting to break through that doleful sky to the sunlight above. And then suddenly, the vision was stolen from me as we whipped through a tunnel. When I realized we were driving through that very mountain, I couldn't help but shake my head in wonder. Lights zipped past us, offering swift processions of vision, and there were even another 2 cars coming the opposite way which, as far as I could remember, were the only other people I'd seen so far. It dawned on me that I knew this tunnel. From the research I'd done, the pictures and videos I'd seen. This was the new Inunaki tunnel that was built, ignoring the village completely. Legend has it that even in this modern one, lone cars will break down without reason, and all the lights inside the tunnel, including the cars, will flicker off. There will be a sound of scuttling footsteps outside, echoing and reverberating about the tunnel so as to mask the true reflection, until the car would be met with a gentle but harrowing brushing and scrabbling sound. If this happens, you must ensure all doors are locked immediately. After a while, the lights in the tunnel will flicker on, the car will work once more, and, to those who have experienced this horror, they will find tiny fingerprints, marks and swipes, on their door, near the handle. I could feel myself shaking, staring around anxiously and thanking our fortune we saw those other 2 cars. Then, a sudden burst of natural light, and relief, flitted in the vehicle once more as we emerged from the other side. Out this way, in the distance, I saw the dam, mighty and imperial. I realized then, we were almost there. A sense of foreboding began to seep within me. My stomach began squirming. I'd seen this dam once or twice before, prior to the knowledge of Inunaki. Initially, I perceived it as a magnificent feat of engineering, as all dams were, But now with the knowledge that this was the very injection of one of the stories, that the dam backed up the water to such a level that it made the town unsafe, unstable, treacherous and moistened the earth so as to slip and grip many people into the risen depths until they drowned, I shuddered. Some reports claim the dam completely submerged the town, but it's unclear. The cement was so imposing, and stretched such a lengthy curve that it would take a solid 10 to 15 minutes, if not more, to walk across. In the center, white rapid water spewed out. All this, for that. If this was indeed a cause for many of the deaths, it was haunting to see it still flowing so freely. Behind it, more forested mountains melded into one another, with a lone pylon erected in the midst. Though my thoughts were focusing on whether this was a good idea or not, the car continued onward, and I could see Nishimoto ducking and peering through the windscreen, clearly trying to spot something. After slowing down for the last few minutes of the journey, he took a turn down a beaten path, not quite a road but still clearly traveled enough to be distinct. It felt as if we were driving through the scrambling forest I saw earlier, but this time below the canopy. The trunks marched, as varied as the houses, thick, thin, old, young, tall and proud, withered and gnarled. They loomed above the car, and I tried to take them in, impressive as they were. Here, the darkness of the sky above was suffocated further, and Nishimoto flicked the headlights on full beam out of necessity, allowing concentrated brightness to lance before us, and give brief, unsettling insight into the depths. Though, there was nothing of note but more trees, more moss, more forest. The caffeine seemed to have found my reserves of anxiety, and had swept them from where they lay dormant, washing my entire body with a nervous tension. And then, just like that, the car stopped in a small alcove, where a copse of haggard old witch-like trees had tangled their branches around one another, in a foul conspiracy, and the heavy leaves drooped over to form a feathered arch. We left the car, met with a chorus of birdsong, and grabbed our bags. There was a subtle chill here, even with the trees blocking out the wind which shuffled the green ceiling above, letting it undulate calmly, a sensation I didn't share. I looked up to see the flickers and slithers of the dullness above filter in, and then glanced over to my companion who caught my eye, and chuckled as I gave a dramatic grimace. Though, it wasn't entirely a joke. "Let's go," he said simply, and before I even gave an answer, he began walking. Now, being within here was creepy enough for me. If he decided to be done with the journey and turn back, I wouldn't have been angry. I loved the hiking, but this already had a completely different taste to it. I was never this nervous, this anxious, this on edge, even at the foot of the tallest mountain. This was already kindling major regret. I followed in his footsteps, each one leaving a muffled wet thud into the dew-doused carpet of snapped twigs, creeping roots and sodden soil. I kept seeing silhouetted hands reaching from below, but as I gave them a wide berth and focused on them, I could see they were just a tangled mass of warped and contorted branches. Still, I made sure to avoid every single one I saw. In this vigilance, I also brought my attention above, trying to spot the source of the nearby trill and tweet that pierced above all others, or peer through that tightly packed leaning and bending trunks to ensure there was no one else nearby. Every now and then, there would be a snapping of a branch or a leaf would clip off from its spindly limb, and fall nearby causing me to jump. We had taken to following a series of pink markers that were tied around trees. Every so often, an old battered sign had been hammered into the ground, muddied and draped with wet, clinging foliage. I noticed the kanji for mountain, and assumed this was just a roundabout way to get to the village. Though, for the first time, I didn't want to enjoy hiking. I wanted to get there, and leave. Just to say I've done it. "Is it far?" I asked, and he turned to me, puzzled. "Far? Is it far?" I pointed to the ground and then with my other hand, tapped it and spread my arms wide, then back together, then wide again to indicate distance. "Maybe," he shrugged. "Don't know." Well, that didn't quite instill me with confidence. We carried on this unsteady walk, wreathed by wild nature, and the trees only seemed to grow older and taller with each step, entering the maw of some wild hell. Where the canopy knitted thick and dense, casting a pool of shadow beneath, I kept imagining I could see heads peeking out at me. Little pale faces stealing a quick glance before flashing back behind the trunks of which they were hiding. But, whenever I stared, focused, challenged, there was nothing. It was only in my peripherals, so I knew it was just my tired mind, my anxiety, my excitement, all mingling to stage a horror show in my head. Still, that foreboding sense I felt earlier seemed to be galvanizing within, vibrating and blurring my thoughts, booming with each heartbeat. We were clearly going against gravity, and I noticed that in the remote distance, I could hear the trickling of water. I really doubted it was the dam. But, I couldn't help but staple the vision into my mind's eye. With the floor being wet, and each footstep having to be pressed hard so as not to slip, it was everything I could do to not picture the horror of traipsing through a familiar environment, my home for so many years, only for one day have it betray me, slip out beneath me, pull me down and have me tumble with a terrible splash into my demise. Flailing in futility, icy and freezing, trying my utmost to swim to the surface and gasp at precious oxygen. Maybe even if they did, the ones who allegedly met this fate, the sudden drop would be so steep that they couldn't manage to climb out. Just pull themselves across, desperate for some purchase in which they could throw themselves on land only to slip back in, wide-eyed terror beneath the suffocating stillness, the black water gushing into their lungs, and in the distance, a shadow. I shook my head, trying to shed that horror of the depths from within, but after a few blinks, I was still there. And then, I saw the face of a woman hurtling toward me. She looked furious, her blank white eyes rabid and raging. Her wet, oily black hair ragged and scraped behind her at the sheer velocity, as she darted through the water with ease, swiftly approaching closer and closer. I gasped for air, trying to scream at the same time, and the sound of my roar brought me back to the forest. It bounded into the distance, fading fainter and fainter with each second, until soon, it fizzled into an embarrassing memory, and hidden within the soundscape of chirping, snapping, swishing. Nishimoto had jumped, and turned to face me alert and panicked. I laughed, sweating and shaking. He looked incredibly concerned, but I just apologized, and told him in Japanese I was really tired, mostly because I didn't know how to say exhausted. Which I was. I should have opted for a second coffee. I focused on the path ahead now, trying to spot the pink marker before him. Half to ensure I didn't overexcite myself again, and half because I really didn't want to slip. There was no water around, but that image was enough to force caution. We delved further into trees and shadows, as if we had found the source of night itself, though looking up I could see leaves of orange mottling the greenery like burning embers. And, just like that, I felt soothed by the beauty of nature, an outside tonic to ease the inner overthinking. After about 30 minutes of walking, and him anxiously checking back to see if I was okay, making me feel substantially embarrassed enough to keep laughing at myself from the cringe, we reached a strangely clear opening. Here a larger sign was erected, which I knew from sight rather than understanding, the summit. It was a very modest summit, and I wondered why we had traversed here if he wanted to go the village. He tottered over to one of the trees in front of this sign, on which two smaller signs were attached to it. One pointed the way we had just come from, and the other, well, the opposite way. Nishimoto tapped the other sign, Inunakimura. And then, as easy as that, we began to descend. Going down was a much easier feat than going up, naturally, and much less frightening in the realms of panic-induced visions, thankfully. About 10 minutes in, he stopped suddenly, giving me a start, and placed a hand out for me to do the same. He pointed into the distance, and I could see a natural break in the canopy before us. Framed within these flaming reds, soothing oranges and comfortable greens, was a huge blue bridge that extended across an enormous gaping space between two mountains. Behind it more and more mountains, ubiquitous as they were, solid shoulders of pure dark green clambering over one another. Far below it a tangled ravine of swaying trees, unbroken and sweeping across the surface like an autumnal plague. In Japanese, he told me it was Inunaki Bridge, which I understood. Then, gravely, followed with, Jisatsu. Jisatsu? I repeated, feeling like a child as I always did when I didn't understand. Jisatsu, he repeated, and then placed his hand in front of him flat, palm down. It was trembling ever so slightly from the effort, and I noted that we should eat something soon. Then, he pointed at the bridge with his other hand, brought two fingers above the first, and walked them like little legs, indicating a person, to the edge. With a bending of the fingers, and a push, he replicated someone jumping off. Then pointed back at the bridge. Jisatsu. The meaning struck me hard then. I shuddered involuntarily. But still, I was fascinated. I asked him to wait as I checked. He was right. That bridge was an infamous spot for suicides. Just like the dam, it bore bright and searing in my mind. The bridge itself was amazing, so colossal and impressive, a vivid, vibrant blue with a huge arch beneath to support it. The land it overlooked was so boundless and prodigious, that to drop into that, to plummet, like one of those beautiful, heartbreakingly brief cherry blossoms was just, in a term, hauntingly tragic. How many people had taken that last step? What were their last thoughts? Could they even be found in such an incomprehensible expanse? I started to feel incredibly hot. It seemed that it wasn't just the village that was cursed, but the entire landscape around it. As if whatever energy had harbored and tainted within there one day, had poured out freely like the water in the dam, and spread its malevolence all around, allowing it to fester and rot. And here we stood, overlooking it from within. Nishimoto asked if I wanted to take a picture, but it felt like a foul slight, a massive sign of disrespect to the countless souls that had looked upon that same view before they plunged and snuffed their last breath, dashing their future into the wilderness below. I politely refused, wanting to let them keep that bittersweet beauty to themselves. Further down we traipsed, carefully. The birdsong grew louder yet and thicker still here. The rustling of the leaves above was a mere muffled backdrop now, and I could barely hear myself think. It was strange, but I felt as if the birds, the trees, something was aware of us. The hairs on my arms, the back of my neck, everywhere began to stand on end. I suppose I had this feeling as soon as we got out the car, but now it was settling heavy and demanding precedence. But those fleeting faces in my peripherals? I tried to expunge it was just silliness. I just had to stop being ridiculous, focus on the path ahead. The pink marker slunk ahead bravely before us, stark bright against the mulchy, brown, mossy surroundings, and then a thundering drumbeat boomed near us. Snapping twigs and breaking branches echoed in its wake, and they began to grow rapidly louder as the entity approached. I panicked. I couldn't even bring myself to scramble backward or locate where it heralded from. But within a second I saw something burst out from a thicket slightly ahead. Brown and elegant, bouncing in a swift beauty. A deer. I began laughing in sheer shame. A deer. I didn't even realize I had fallen to the floor, but there I was shaking and red-faced, looking up at Nishimoto, who now was brandishing a small knife. In the meager dearth of light, I saw his fingers striped red and white in the tightness of his grip. I glared at it, feeling a silly anxiety bubbling within, but he looked down at it and then explained, "Inoshishi." He stared at my blank face for a moment, and then hazarded in English, "Many boar." Well, that was almost enough for me to refuse the trip. Cancel it there and then. A deer was one thing, but an angry boar with razor tusks? Yet, we would have to walk that whole way back. If we at least saw the tunnel, I'd be satisfied. That would be enough for me. That's all it needed to be, even though every sense of logic was screaming at me to turn back, that it wasn't worth it. I wish I listened. He helped me up, and we made our way further down for almost another 10 minutes, until thankfully, we saw a cement path snaking through. The side of the path was littered with wrappers and rubbish which, through was more present in Japan than I initially was led to believe. Before me was more than I had ever seen. That indicated that this was a well-traveled path, by others as stupid as us, but one that isn't maintained by any authority or governing body. Regardless, to feel the solid, smooth cement was a blessing. I never thought I'd be so relieved for level land in my life. I peered back up through the pink-guided trail we'd fought through, and already from outside it seemed to meld in with the rest so seamlessly, that I imagined it'd be very easy to miss should you wish to go back that way. But I shrugged the anxiety away, as that feeling of being watched lessened the second we crossed the perimeter. The birdsong still tweeted ahead, and that undertone of swaying leaves and trickling water could be heard, but now there was an addition of far-off engines moaning as they sped by, another strange relief I never even reckoned I'd ever be thankful for. However, we didn't have to walk for much longer before we saw it. Blocked and stacked by 4 pillars of concrete slabs, with some more placed on top and more still placed in front, someone did not want us to enter. They were covered in weeds, weaving in and out of every crevice, accompanied by furry moss like a rash, all wreathed by a nimbus of wild and scrawled graffiti. But, I'm afraid I can't finish writing about this right now. Because even allowing that image to revisit my head is reminding me of what we found in the village, and I'm trembling, alone in my apartment, because I get the impending sense that there is something aware of what I wish to disclose, and it's close. I'm going to go for a walk. It's daytime here. Maybe I'll write about the tunnel, entering it, and the village in another update if I can shake this feeling later. I think I just need to be outside for a little while. To be around the town whilst it's awake. Perhaps take the last of those cherry blossoms in. They really are ambivalently beautiful. You know, I've never been one for entertaining superstition. The spiritual world has always fascinated me more than horrified me, but, right now, after that, I don't want to challenge this feeling, not with this sense of eerie proximity. Inunakimura, the abandoned howling village of rural Japan. Part 3. The cycle of cherry blossoms is well and truly over. The vibrant pink petals of beauty have long drifted, tragic and magnificent, into the ground. Trodden on, now, discarded and forgotten by those who rushed from all around to snap pictures of them in their preening relevance. Usually, when the world is not barred behind fragile biology, people would sit beneath them, drinking their themed beers, sharing picnics and basking in their fleeting transience. They'd rest, talking wistfully about memories, muse excitedly about hopes, and deliberate over current circumstances as around them, a flurry of bright brilliance fluttered like one of nature's more diluted maelstroms. But now, the green leaves that take their place have claimed conquest on the branches, clinging tight and stubborn, yet, still emanating a more common and attainable visage of elegance. I think, like those, the prime of my thoughts have somewhat fizzled and frittered over the past month or so. I can barely hold tight onto one solid thought for more than a few seconds before it jolts, contorts and bends into something tainted, marred and rotten. Sleep, to me, is a memory. Of course, my body gets the re-energizing it needs, but hardly is it ever restful. In my apartment, every day every hour, my peripherals paint a gloomy silhouette of a ragged vision. It stands, tall and hunched, lurching over predatorily like a harrowing entity, but, when I build up the bravery to steal a glance, it has gone, faded and melded into the shadow of the cabinet, or melted into the tatami mat floor. When I'm cooking, my senses kick in, and I can feel something else standing a short distance behind me, studying my every move. When I'm showering, and my eyes are squinting through the soak, I can see the figure blurred and outlined behind the screen door, or creeping just out of sight of the mirror's telling reflection. I've been trying to tell myself, over and over, that it's nothing my mind the trip, but, now, I don't know. When the nightmares are in full force and I spark into the darkness of my room, I can make it out for a few seconds, standing at the foot of my bed, leaning forward as if waiting for the time to pounce, and even in the darkest nights, where the moon tickles only a hint of silver into the room, I can see a sheen glimmer on the wet, black hair, and just a flash of a pale, tortured face, anguished eyes dark as grief. Then I panic into full lucidity, and, before me, nothing. My host town is much quieter than it ever has been. The days are sometimes as quiet as the nights. Most shops are closed. It's as if the planet is working in a conspiracy to keep me trapped in with my fear manifested, slowly devolving and pruning this place to leave it as lonely and abandoned as there. The hiking with Nishimoto has stopped for the time being. He claims it's because of the virus, but, I know that's an excuse. And, I tried to clear my own thoughts, take myself on walks to the nearby mountains which are junior in their difficulty, but behind every tree, I see those faces from the village. Amidst the rustling leaves, and contrastingly chirpy birdsong, I hear faint whines, hollow moans, gulping breaths. And in the distance, always in the distance, the same figure from my apartment. And, as I typed those words, I shivered. An army of goose pimples stormed across my body, ready for battle, because I know deep down that the only way I can fix this erratic disposition, to offer this madness some respite, is to return. It's the last thing I want to do, but the urge is starting to sear at such an extent that it feels like my insides are on fire. I know I need to. Maybe. But first, I want to try telling it first. Perhaps I just need to put into words the anxiety, and let it drift off onto the eyes of other, impartial people who can tell me I'm being crazy, and returning to a town that shocked and snapped my reality to such an extent is nothing short of sheer lunacy. Please. For now, let me explain what I saw when trying to enter Inunakimura, the abandoned howling village of rural Japan. Nishimoto and I sat for a while, taking in the blockage of the tunnel. It really was a mess, and clearly a common spot for people to want to mark their presence. The reaching wall of which the tunnel was bored through was clearly left to disrepair. Leaves and vines trickled down it, whilst roots burst through here and there in bunched verdant blooms. At one point in its history, it may have been grey, but now a fuzz of dark forest moss had clawed across the veneer, in large patches, whilst typhoons and storm had weathered the rest, bringing great weeping droops of discoloration. The graffiti was so thick that near completely, each individual addition camouflaged another, so that just a messy scrawl of differing colors fought for precedence. Mostly, it was just a clear moment of random Japanese, and even a few English phrases. But, the weather was already working on eroding and effacing their presence, as if even the elements wished to mute this town's cursed history. It seemed Nishimoto could make little sense of most of it, and of course, I could make less. He procured 2 little foiled sandwiches, and bade me eat one of them. I was ravenous at the sight of it, so almost inhaled it before we decided to go on ahead. We deliberated, individually mostly but with a few muttered interactions, as we ate. To get through to the village path, we could either hike around the current course we were on, in where we would have to carry on until we found a cutting, and struggle to slip through there before we found ourselves on the other side of the tunnel. Or we can go through it. We excitedly, and foolishly decided to go through. Washing the sandwiches down with some water, clear and crisp as crystal, we made toward the piles of stones blocking off the tunnel's entrance. They only piled so high, but it was easy to slip through at the top, where the pinnacle of the arch peaked above, shadowy and menacing. I tried to peer through with the safety of an obstacle between, knowing that during its construction, this tunnel caved in and stole the life of the workers within. Just there, a meter away, those very workers are fabled to roam within, clawing at any souls who wish to traipse through and steal their lives, too. Or even in the more grim realms of reality, knowing that a group of teens murdered an innocent man here in the not-too-distant past. Brutally beat and stabbed him. Before burning the body, they were caught and convicted for the heinous acts. I started thinking that maybe this was enough. The sight, and the bragging rights of, but it was too late. Nishimoto had cupped his hands together, interlacing the fingers and nodding for me to stand on them for a boost up. With a stifled groan, I threw my bag atop the blockage, reached my foot up to the aged man's hands and jumped to reach the top. He seemed to support my weight with ease. I was infinitely impressed. I scaled it easily enough as the uneven stacks presented more than enough nooks and ledges for me to claim purchase on, but once at the top, I refused to look at the tunnel side until he joined. He passed me his bag, which I placed to the side, then held my hand down for him to grip. He was light enough for me to be able to assist in the ascent, but he still had to use his spare hand to find purchase here and there, as well as a few choice phrases. Most I didn't need to understand to get the gist of it, before he joined me. He was grinning as he crawled next to me, and then, together, we turned to look into the darkness. Some daylight seeped through, of course, and disclosed the secrets of yet more scrawled graffiti that seemed to steal every inch of the wall like some bizarre mural of thrill-seekers, threats, signatures, and surprisingly, lovers. It was odd to think that two people sharing lives would want to visit such a place, let alone slip here and mark their time. But, it oddly comforted me. This wasn't some stupid idea, regardless of the uneasiness demanding my thoughts' attention. This was a common place for the unconventional tourist. The floor was a massed tangle of rubbish, chairs, beer cans, and other, more uncouth leavings. There was no visible floor beneath the detritus, no visible wall behind the scratchings. It was almost as if the tunnel no longer existed. I started, suddenly, as a beam of light speared ahead of us, offering a little more insight into what was within. Nishimoto had procured a torch from one of his many pockets, and allowed it to sniff ahead of us like an excited puppy, or a pawn willing to pour forth recklessly. It shimmered on the reflective wrappers, revealing more and more weeds that were somehow thriving here without sunlight. It scratched across the wall, giving attention to the omnipresent markings, different alphabets, different languages, all scribbled with only a smattering of sense. It was bizarre to think that within here where we were looking right now, deaths, murder. With each end blocked off, it gave an odd feeling of a desecrated and dilapidated mausoleum, and I suddenly felt an overwhelming urge to retreat, clamber down and rush back to his car. But instead, I leant forward, rooted and mesmerized by the charged energy within. I assumed he was just looking about, but it seemed as if he was checking for something, because he gave me a quiet, "Okay, we go," before shuffling his body around so his stomach was on the flat of the mossy blocks, then shimmied beneath the small gap, letting his legs dangle into the darkness, and then with a careful feeling in the void, dropped to the ground. There was a muffled thud that scuttled up the blocks and scurried past me, wanting no business of the man who authored them. Anxious, stressed, but trying to tell myself the feelings were unjustified, or just imagination running wild, I followed. As soon as I stepped foot on the crunching and rustling floor, it felt as if the world changed. The sunlight that slipped through from the outside didn't seem to exist within. It was as if with us, twilight had broken into the tunnel, and the only light we could rely on was that manufactured of Nishimoto's torch. The other end of the tunnel was clear in sight, perhaps about a 30 to 40 second walk were it not for the traveler's obstacles beneath us. It too was blocked up, but for sure we could slip through it. It would just be a tighter fit. I was shivering already, trying to think back about all the mountains we'd hiked in the past, and how those were technically more treacherous than this. The only difference was the place's background, and I was applying that to every thought. I positioned myself slightly behind him, and then brought my phone out in order to light my own path. A fuzz of dust swirled and whooshed, dazzled by the light. Each step seemed to disturb its peppered cascade, causing it to whiz as a flurry of bright specks in protest. It was almost as thick with dust as the walls were with etchings and the floor was with rubbish, so I brought my arm to my mouth, ensuring I couldn't inhale much. As Nishimoto waded through carefully, his light mostly caressing the floor as he bowled a path through, I took to trying to make sense of any of the scribbles. Most of them were names from what I could see, somewhat preserved due to lack of rainfall but still hardly clear. Others, random images of characters shouting, smiling, winking, standard. A few random phrases in English that I could read, which I assume were mistranslations, such as "it is seen," or "hate is mine." Each footstep we took was echoed, the thud itself as well as the crunch and rustle. For every step we took, it sounded as if 1,000 phantoms were racing across every surface of the old, forgotten walls. The sights this tunnel must have seen. Murders, deaths, visitors, lovers, for what was recorded, 1,000 unknown things will have happened here, and there we were, wading our way through the rubbish with no protection. Then, as we reached about halfway through, I could make out a huge piece of contrived work that had been infected and invaded by myriad lesser drawings. I paused for a moment, trying to make out the bigger image. Feeling like some lowly version of an archaeologist, trying to piece together the hieroglyphics in a sealed tomb. The entire image was framed by a waving, yet spiky orange outline, which I quickly discerned to be a static blaze. But I couldn't exactly see what was the original victim or object subjected to the sketch scorching was. It could have been a few of the works within, a leg there, a cartoon here, an angelic wing sprouting from some bizarre spider thing, twisted and elongated but with the face of a fanged woman. And then, in the midst, I could see a face staring out from the mess of it all. Like a stalker, peering through a lattice of dusky leaves, completely hidden in one sense, but now I could decipher its shape. It seemed to be all I could see, everything else sunk into the backdrops, and left just this one single image. Something about it seemed so visceral, real, soulful. Then the eyes closed. I screamed and fell back, feeling a jagged assault of garbage stab at me in the frantic opportunity. Nishimoto was gushing a stream of Japanese, sounding panicked, desperate, and anxious all in one. He hooked his hands beneath my armpits, similar to with a deer, and heaved me up to standing as I was trying to explain that the face right the. It was lost again. What was just a moment ago, so near, so clear, so real as if someone was standing before me, now had retreated back into the cloak of shadows that the tunnel and mess offered. Atama. I forced through in a panic. There ahead. Not knowing how to explain, there was a face staring from the wall. But he just gazed from me to the wall, puzzled. All of a sudden, I could feel an icy chill within, permeating from the walls. It was stealing through, pervasive, emanating, ruthless. A mist began to swish, so thick that the beams of light were mere gestures, nothing more. Nothing more. Suddenly, the overwhelming sense of another's presence began to thunder about the tunnel. It was silent, but for the sound of the forest without, but still, I could hear everything as if two separate worlds were coexisting in terrible disharmony. Whines, cries for help in Japanese, some in English, muffled screams, throaty, primal roars galloping over helpless sobs of despair. My mind conjured the vision of the woman in the lake again, the pale face, the drenched hair. She looked frantic, angry, and Nishimoto's hand clutched at my wrist, and he began to yank me backward. He was shouting, I was shouting, the very maw of hell we seemed to have stumbled into was replying in kind, with countless voices and a furor of chaotic anguish. Please. Could be heard, drowning helplessly amidst the other calls. Then, I felt a rush of icy cold water stream in, as Nishimoto and I both were knocked back by it. I hit the ground hard again, feeling an armory of jags like before take their bite at the victim, but Nishimoto's hand fumbled about and pulled me back up. I noticed it was bone dry as was I, but that wave came in from nowhere with such a force. We felt it. I was crying. Sobbing. He was yelling, perhaps prayers, perhaps curses, perhaps orders, but I couldn't understand. I just followed where the hand pulled me. Hopeless and lacking direction or sense. Until, the mist seemed to loosen in catharsis of its outbreak, but I wished it hadn't. As behind us, a fire bloomed into crackling, roaring fury, loud enough to sear and dwarf all the other noises that boomed a cacophony into the damn tunnel. The sudden illumination devoured every inch of the darkened tunnel, blasting an overload of horrors that I couldn't focus on. Because, from that white-hot blaze, a figure emerged, black as coal, with a nimbus of unfurling steam, curling and rising in a hypnotic fashion. Each one singed orange by the heat behind them. I watched in panicked awe as, from this figure, they hissed upward until hitting the vandalized ceiling and fizzled like a snuffed dream. The figure took a painful, unsteady, shambling step forward, and I heard a chorus of cracking and scratching from the flaked skin peeling and falling to the floor. I was frozen, even with Nishimoto pulling me. I couldn't move. I wanted to. I needed to, but every ounce of me wanting to leave wasn't listening. I just stared back. The veins of the burnt silhouette glowed with cinders, like a river network of lava, breaking off in jolts and rejoining. A new step caused them to glow as white-orange as the fire behind it, then settle back to a dim glow with a hiss. A horrid, hallowed, raspy voice broke from a mouth of embers, followed by a puff of blackened smoke, though, what it said, was beyond me. Almost immediately, a rush of clattering began to approach at a rapid speed, as from the sprawling below, a huddle of crooked, mangled, and rotten hands sprung from beneath, gripping blindly at nothingness before slipping below the illuminated mass, which now I saw consisted wholly of bodies, and then spearing back up once more. Closer, and closer they got, which was the jolt of rushing reality I needed to finally find my feet. I moved, feeling the heat of the flames, hearing the hiss of the steam, the call of his hollow voice, the sudden, squelched thrust of reaching hands chasing my fear from behind me. The tunnel seemed to stretch out, impossibly far, as if the walls zoomed into a horizonless distance, but I couldn't hold back. I ran, and ran, and ran, ignoring the consistency of what I was trotting on. It felt as if I had been running for hours, refusing to turn back, refusing to see if Nishimoto was behind me since I started my flight, until, finally I ran full force into the blockage we climbed to get in the tunnel. I screamed from the pit of my stomach in terror as I felt hands grasp at my shoulder, but I heard Nishimoto's voice instantly after, trying to throw me up before him, and with panicked effort, I scrambled, through stinging tears, and a rapid, stabbing heart, up via whatever I could grab, not caring that the edges were cutting into my flesh, and seeming to burn with a heart of rage. I'm ashamed to admit I didn't even wait to see if he was coming. I didn't even offer a hand to pull him up. I rolled straight off, feeling a frigid chill in contrast to the furnace within, and slammed with a heavy impact onto the cold floor. The wind was knocked out of me, and every fiber of my being, mental and physical, was begging for rest, for tenderness and nurturing. I heard his grunts above me, and with Herculean effort, struggled up to standing. He made it, too. Nishimoto. Looking panicked and confused, horrified and bewildered, bedraggled and exhausted. But, as I turned to bid him to return, I noticed he was staring ahead, mouth open and a face stricken with horror and awe. I followed his line of sight, to see we hadn't retraced our steps. We somehow made it to the other side. The night was black as ink, though. It was early morning when we entered the tunnel. Stars were but a memory of bright, speckled hope. But, before us, a swarm of trees stood stolid and tall, almost impossibly thick and impenetrable. Were it not for a clear cobbled path, littered on either side with the most ornate and beautiful guardian statues I have seen thus far. Each of them a lion dog, with magnificent manes, so beautifully and deftly crafted that it was a wonder they didn't dance in the persistent gusts. They sat, tall, proud, immense. A procession of them faced on another across the path, equidistant, winding off into the darkness of the vast foliage. In each of their mouths, dangled a paper lantern, all glowing their soothing, calming orange that seemed to soothe the anxiety and ordeal from our souls. Without a word to one another, we started on the path, knowing that it would lead us, both of us, to it, the village, Inunakimura.